earlier than scheduled. So if you need a bit of time, we can.
No, I think we can start.
Okay, great. So I give a word to our third grade speaker, Aleksey. You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. Uh, Good evening, everyone. Good night for someone, maybe. The talk is called It Only Seems to Be Fast, and it will be about perceived performance. But first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Aleksey Okhrimenko. I'm a senior developer at Yandex Music, where we develop the best streaming music service for more than 15 million active users. I am also Google developer expert in technology Angular. Also organized a lot of Angular Moscow meetups, so you may know me because of that. Also author of Russian version of Angular documentation, Angular 24.ru, and holding Twitter account Angular Russia. I'm also a founder of Angular.ru, like really large Angular community for with more than 5,000 people. So if you're not joined yet, why not? So it's already time. So also you can find me on the internet, on Twitter or any social network by the nickname Avenger, and my Telegram channel Avenger Nodes. So feel free to join. I also developed a nice extension for Angular. So if you haven't tried it, give it a try. It's extension for Visual Studio Code, which allows you to automate refactoring of your Angular applications. Also, at my free time, I'm trying to teach, mentor, and help people to learn machine learning in JavaScript and Python. So, for example, if you want to study machine learning, you want to do it in JavaScript or write code in Python, feel free to join to those communities. The PyTorch is not made by me, but anyway, it's really interesting and a hot topic right now, so feel free. Now, couple of spoilers. It's This talk is not about Yandex or any experience in Yandex right now, but at the same time, this talk will touch the topics and techniques that used by Yandex, Google, Facebook, Avitas, Bear, etc. by the many companies. Now, the code examples will be in Angular and Eric.js simply because Angular is awesome. Okay, so the first thing I want to start is to make a simple statement. Performance is a requirement right now. It's not a nice to have feature that you can, okay, I have it and it's nice. No, it's a requirement. Now, there's numerous studies made by Google, Facebook, any huge company that show direct correlation between dropping in performance and loss of money, and dropping in performance and poor customer satisfaction, which also lead to loss of money. So, okay, performance is really important, but one thing always bothered me, like what is the root cause, like psychologically, what's the problem? Like, is it so hard to wait? Like, wait a couple of minutes. Like in dial-up times, I was waiting 5 minutes to connect to internet. Not a problem. Well, let me show you an example. Like, you have a website and you need a click checkout button. Like, it's all you need, but it's loading. It's loading. Not another bundle. No. Please don't stop. Another 2 MB bundle. No. Okay, so you may be familiar with this kind of situation, and it really proves that waiting can cause an anxiety, uncertainty, discomfort, stress, irritation, or worse than everything, plain boredom. All of those feelings you don't want your customers to feel and be experienced on your website. So, how to reduce this waiting time? How to reduce the wait? Well, we must do everything quickly. Now, before you jump in and say thank you, Captain Obvious, I will mm, not be lazy and tell you one more time that increasing actual performance will decrease the waiting time. It's kind of obvious, but it's really, really important. Now, there's a lot of tools and techniques like the tools like Lighthouse, DevTools Profiler that allow you to measure performance and even have some best practice built in that you can use. But anyway, one thing you need to understand, like, even if you do all of this, even if you do it perfectly, this may simply not be enough. Like, what? How's that? Now, let me tell you a story. A story is about when the speed alone is not enough. Well, one American airport have this like well-known by everyone problem. Like when the airplane arrive, like passengers go to the airport and the baggage travels on the other route to the baggage claim. And usually you have to wait your package like somewhere around 30 minutes, and it's a good case if you need to wait 30 minutes. Anyway, people were complaining, so they gathered the best engineers, like really smartest people, to optimize this time, and they made this waiting time 8 minutes. Like, it's insane, like 8 minutes and you get your baggage. It's awesome. But the funny thing is, people still complained. They were still unsatisfied with the experience. And this is when they tried something different. What they did is they strategically located airplane on the other side of the airport. So, what it allowed them to do is that the people have to travel to the baggage claim, and the time of travel was equal or slightly bigger than time to deliver the baggage. And so the thing is, when the people came to the baggage claim, the baggage was already there. And this was awesome. All complaints have stopped immediately because people will get the baggage immediately. But weirdest thing is the time to deliver the package was exactly the same, 8 minutes. So what on earth have they optimized? Like, they didn't optimize the time, they didn't optimize performance. It's exactly the same. Well, the thing that they optimized is called perceived performance. So remember this term, it's really important. Well, perceived performance is a really, really large field, and actual real performance is really important core part of it. So, for example, if you optimize actual your application performance, it will be perceived as application that is faster. It's only logical. But here's one thing: you can use various tricks, smart design patterns, or smart design of your application, and also setting your priorities straight to make perceived performance actually better. So your perceived performance will be awesome without touching actual performance. So you make it look and feel fast, even if the real performance is getting worse. So it's all actually based on the fact that people are really bad at measuring time. Like, I can tell that for myself, I'm really bad at it. And funny thing, we actually can use this flaw of a human to use against him to make him happy customer. So let's try to do this. Let's look at the some best practices we can apply. I divided them in a couple of categories. The first category is don't block your user. Okay, you might say, it's not me. I'm not blocking anyone. My application is perfect. Well, does this resemble something? Do you see it in your application? If yes, then think about it. Spinners actually is not a really good option. I will rather say it's not an option at all. Well, let's see. For example, we have a table of users and we have delete button on one of the row of the table. So we click remove, we fetch the data and we remove the item. And during all of the time, we're showing these annoying spinners that doesn't allow us to do anything. But what we can do is we actually can just register the click, show that we register it by changing some state, like telling person that we're removing this item. And while this request is happening, we can unlock user and let him do other things like delete other items, do something awesome and not wait. And if everything is fine, we will show him notification that everything is fine. And if there's an error, we show notification that there is an error. Well, it's simple. But you can say that, oh, okay, I can only make one request at a time for backend or architecture reason. I don't know. So we can use EricJS here. So we can use the power of higher order observables, for example, concat, and we can use it to create a simple schedule of observables that will be, for example, in this case, will be executed sequentially one after another. This is like the simplest case, and you can create more sophisticated one depending on your restriction and limitations of your API or your front end. You may say, okay, I need to block the component because while I removing the item, I cannot change the attribute, etc. So I need to block this component. It's not logical to work with it. Okay, so what you can do is to avoid one like common pitfall. For example, NGX spinner, also component for spinners, have one awesome option that called full screen, and you can set it to false to prevent showing spinner on the full screen. You know, it may sound obvious, but a lot of people just making like blocking the entire screen just because they didn't thought this through. Well, and if you're still skeptical that this shouldn't even happen, I will tell you an awesome story. I was invited in Sber in their sub company called DomClick for housing, and they invited me to the internal meetup where I was talking about the same things about perceived performance, and I was talking about spinners. And after some time, I talked to the people, and they say, "Hey, we found the places when we were blocking user and showing spinner, but it wasn't necessary." And we fixed it and it helped. Of course, it's not like it will fix every problems in your application, but think about, look at your application. Do you really need to block an entire screen for one request? Now, second advice is to lie. It's usually always helps to solve all of the problems. Anyway, so what I mean by that, what I mean about lying, well, I mean illusion of speed. Now, generally, the illusion of speed I will be referring to is based on motion blur and the effect called chronostasis. You can read about it more on Wikipedia, on other sources. It's really interesting, like how we can trick our brains and like make it think that times goes differently when it's not. But I would not right now. Let me just show one example. For example, we have two spinners, one with Roadrunner and one with Coyote. So as you see, the speed of balls is exactly the same. But when we increase the amount of balls on the Coyote, it starts spinning faster. And if we increase it even more, it's like 2 times faster. Well, the funny thing is the speed is exactly equal. So what you see is an optical illusion, actually. And it's mostly based on the motion blur. Now, how we can use this effect of motion blur in, well, the spinner with Coyote is fun, but how we can use it? Now, we all know the progress bar, and it's plain boring component. How we can help here? Now, if you add these stripes that will be animating backwards, they will create this counter movement. Then you will perceive, actually, people perceive this as faster. But if you add one more thing, if you increase the momentum of animation, so the closer to end, the faster it's go, user will start to perceive it even faster. So overall, by combination of stripes and momentum acceleration of animation, you can get more than 12% perceived performance increase. So people will think that this lower progress bar actually faster on 10% when it's actually not. Well, there's an interesting study about that, but you can use it in Angular. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find good components, and I hadn't time to create myself. But there's good chunks of code on CodePen that you can use as an inspiration to create this kind of component, this kind of progress bar. It's not hard at all. Now, the next thing is the skeleton. Well, what is this thing? It's actually the best alternative to spinners that you can have. Well, you probably saw these kind of weird patterns like circles, line, rectangles when you load LinkedIn or, for example, entering a Slack. So this is exactly a skeleton. A skeleton is something like a rough sketch of your application. It will show the places where the content will appear, and it's make you like see and feel like the content is loading, it's not static. Well, by playing with it, and you can actually gain like 10 and 20% increase in perceived performance depending on the situation and configuration. Well, for example, this awesome study showed that 18 individuals confirmed that overall they perceived the skeleton as a faster loading screen than everything else. Well, in Angular, there's an awesome NGX skeleton loader that you can easily customize to your application theme, and you can actually easily show it and build your skeleton. So you show it by default and then replace it with an actual content. Easy as that. Well, the next category is to be optimistic. What does it mean? Like, everyone saw this example, like in Counter-Strike, you run behind the wall and you killed. Of course, this terrorist is a cheater. This cannot be other way. Well, actually, it's not. Actually, what you see is the effect called latency compensation. So, what does it mean? Like, for example, if you are a counter-terrorist and you making a headshot in the terrorist's head, you shooting at some coordinates. So, terrorist in some coordinates in the space. So, what you're doing is you send it to the server, those coordinates, for confirmation. And at the same time, the animation of terrorist death is showing to you. So you seem like you killed him. But what's actually happening is the server confirming the terrorist was at those exact coordinates. So he was traveling at those coordinates. And after it's confirmed, it sends you confirmation. And after this, the terrorist get this notification that he have to play death animation. Now, after you have a confirmation, nothing is actually happening on the UI. So this confirmation step is not visible to you at all. But what happened in the case of the race condition? Well, this is really interesting. We have to look at that. So, for example, if terrorist and counter-terrorist shoot roughly at the same time, well, they both see the animation that they killed their opponents, like the counterist killed terrorist and terrorist killed counter-terrorist. So server gets those two notifications and decide who was faster. After that, the counter-terrorist get the confirmation that everything is fine. He's actually have to do nothing, so nothing is happened. But the terrorist actually gets the confirmation that he was really late. And what's happening here is really interesting. The animation of death is canceling, and the terrorist is playing death animation for himself. So you may have experienced this if you played on really crappy network on Counter-Strike. So it may sound a little bit complicated or unfamiliar, but if you heard latency compensation, you should know that there's actually another word for it in front end called optimistic UI updates or optimistic updates. So the best example the most famous example is Twitter. So if you notice, when you click like button, the request actually still pending. The time to make this request happens in 2 second request to the server, but the like button appears like it click immediately, like right now. So what is happening is that we change the UI and only then doing the synchronization with backend. Well, the simplest example in Angular is actually like mind-blowingly simple. So, for example, you making post request to add item. So what you actually doing, instead of like adding item on list when it actually added on server, you actually adding it immediately. So you're doing this optimistic update. You thinking like, okay, everything should be fine. The request should be successful. So when the request is actually successful, you have to do nothing. This is the best part. I really love to do nothing. So this is like the best example of it. But if there's an exception, there's one really interesting thing we have to do. We have to do the rollback of our application state. So what does it mean? We need to remove this item that we already added to item list, and after that we can show an error message. So this is the important and the most problematic part on optimistic UI updates. The other thing is really sad is that they are working differently for different state managers. So Eric.js, MobX, etc. have their own implementation. Apollo have their own like quirks and implementations. So I wouldn't even bother to show all of them. Just go to the links of all links at the end of the talk. I will give you this link and I will provide you with some example for different state managers. But for now, it's the simplest thing is just find the example of optimistic UI update for your concrete state manager. Now, after that, you really need to show exponential excerpt. Like what I mean by that. Well, optimistic UI update is problematic in case of rollback. So, for example, if backend is slow or giving us 500 error, we have to roll back. It's annoying for user. It can be confusing, and so there's a lot of problems with that. But what we can do is we can reduce this factor. How? Well, if backend, for example, give us 500 error, it doesn't mean that backend will not answer won't give us a success code after next request. So what we can do is we can add a retry. So we can retry our request each time until it's successful. But infinite retries is really bad idea. It's like it's like the best road to hell. So to avoid that, you have to add the maximum amount of retries. So for example, we have 3. So we will try 3 times before failing this particular request. So we'll send 3 times to backend before finishing this request. So but here is one big problem you may face. There is called self-made DOS, like distributed DOS. Well, what I mean, imagine, for example, that your backend for a second just tired and return everyone 500 error. Usually, you get requests almost randomly for different users, so you have your load to your server is kind of split, and it's like almost equal on the all of the timeline. But if, for example, server deny everyone and everyone will retry, they will retry this request almost simultaneously. And what will happen is like instead of like 100 RPS, you will get 10,000 RPS at 1 second. It may actually be a disaster. So there's actually a pattern to fix this. The pattern called exponential backoff. And lucky for us, Eric.js have additional module back of ArcGIS that implement this operator, so we don't have to implement it ourselves. So there's a simple operator. We have like 3 lines of configuration, and after that we will add initial interval, max retries, and reset on success. All of that. Now, one additional small thing you can add to make you look like you an awesome architecture guy now is to add random shift. What I mean by that? So remember when I was telling you that if everyone retries uh, at the same time, you will get like this denial of service. Now, what we can do is we can shift each everyone by the random shift, and thanks to the distribution, we will get almost not perfect, but distributed curve of request. So they would not start everyone requesting. They will start at different time. So each interval and each retry to our server will be happening on different times. This will really, really help. Next advice, I think it's my favorite one so far, is to predict. Like now, how we can reduce waiting when you can't speed up anything, like you can do nothing. We just need to do it in advance. That's it. Well, imagine that you are selling an ice cream. You have an ice cream shop. And you know that at the lunch, a lot of people are coming in to have a nice ice cream snack after a lunch. And you have a huge, huge line. So what you can do is you can prepare those ice cream in advance because you know there will be a lot of people. So same thing we can do in front end. We can, for example, preload images. This is like oldest hard school example out there. So what you're doing is you're creating the images, set source for them, and do nothing. What I mean by that, like really nothing. We just load in them, and they end up in our browser cache. So after they are there, if you visit the page that have those images, actually, your application will use browser cache, and you will get those images immediately. Well, this nice piece of JavaScript is awesome, but is there anything more sophisticated or like better? Well, actually, there is. There's a thing for grown adults. It's think, for example, you have a style sheet that you use on your second page, and you want to preload it because you know it will be the next page that user clicks. So what you can do is you can add attribute rel and define it as preload and declare it as style type. Well, there's a lot of different types that you can preload, like audio, video, fonts, or for example, fetch request. Even that you can actually preload. So there's actually a different types of preloading. There is prefetch, preconnect, DNS prefetch, prerender. I wouldn't go into a lot of details because they all of them have their own things and abilities, but you can save a lot of work on your page by using those. So you can save like huge amount of load thanks to that. But it will make your application better, but there's one catch. For example, imagine if you prefetch all of possible combination of models where using it can go. For example, you're on your home page, user can go anywhere. So preloading it will require like 2 MB of all of your application. Like this is bad. It's what it wouldn't improve your application performance. Okay, what we can do is we can prefetch only visible links. That's better, like we only load in half of it, like 1 MB. It's better, it's nicer. But there's one thing that we can do. We can add some machine learning actually here. So that's is really hot topic right now. What I mean by that, there's a library made by Google called GuessJazz. What this library do is actually it's using Google Analytics to predict where user are going to go. So for example, it will analyze that almost all of the users on Thursday go to this link. So it will use predictive prefetching with machine learning to predict what have to be prefetched. And you can load only 7% of your actual bundles. So this will really be performant. There's one problem, one caveat that you should know. It works something roughly around 90% accuracy. It really depends, but don't expect too much more. But anyway, overall, your 90% of your users will get awesome user experience, like really perfect one. Now, this library have adapters for Angular, Gatsby, Next.js, and Nuke.js. So as I told you before, all the examples can be used in any language framework, so keep that in mind. Now, let's talk about clicks. Why we need to talk about them? Now, we really need to talk about clicks simply because the clicks is like the most common thing that you do. And when we click something, we usually expect something to change, like some work to be done. So if we learn somehow to predict the click, like predict it ahead of time, we can actually start a lot of work ahead of time and do it really, really faster. So how to predict a click? Now, the most obvious thing is to actually use other browser events, like for example, mouse down or hover. And sometimes you can save like even a second before the actual event is happening. Well, it depends on circumstances. But anyway, hover is really fragile because not always when I hover something I want to click it. So we we can like moving our mouse randomly, so that's not really good thing. So the most safe choice is to use the mouse down. So in Angular it's straightforward. We just change our event to on mouse down. That's it. Now, prepare right now to have your mind blown. Now, look at this awesome library. It's called FutureLink. Now, if we look how fast it can predict. Now, if we see this library is actually predicting the click even faster than hover event. Like for example, it can save like it can be faster 200 or 300 or 400 milliseconds faster than hover event. How do they do that? How is it possible? Is this some another machine learning magic? No, it's actually pretty simple. What this library is using is deceleration pattern. So when your mouse is decelerating its speed, it's usually mean that you are dropping the speed to click on something. And by analyzing the vector of the acceleration and speed of the deceleration, we can actually calculate what the component you want to click, and it's work really really well. I mean it. Now, unfortunately, there's no right now component or directive or library for Angular, so feel free to create one. But you can easily have this some custom JavaScript, and just by passing uh, the the components that you want to use this future link model to work on, you can pass it to predict your components that will be clicked. And it also give you a probability of the element is going to be clicked soon. So this is really, really nice. And let's ask ourselves one question. What a user really desperately want from us? Like he wants UI, the user interface, and it consists of HTML, CSS, and images. This is like the crucial part. I don't mean that JavaScript is not needed, but this is like what really, really user wants, like really, really much. So what we can do is we actually can render HTML, CSS by ourselves ahead of time. Like the most sophisticated and the right way to do it is to use server-side rendering. We can do it in Angular with Angular Universal. And to add server-side rendering is simple as adding schematics Angular Universal Express engine. Of course, there's a lot of caveats. Like, for example, there's not every application will be able to work in SSR mode. So you, for example, to make your application work in SSR, you have to rewrite it from the ground up. It's really inconvenient sometimes. So we what we have here is we have static pre-rendering. It can save us a lot of time and money. What does it does is if you add custom builder for Angular CLI, you can customize your Webpack config and add pre-renderer spa plugin and define some roads that need to be pre-rendered. So those roads where user can go, and you can use Nginx to or save those files as entry points and serve them via Nginx or other static host or dynamic host to give the access to the page faster, to the page actual content that user expect. Now, this is what I called the static pre-rendering for poor. Now, imagine that you need static rendering, but you don't want to mess with all those configurations of Power. You can actually open DevTools and type this line and copy content of document element outer HTML and paste it to the index HTML of your file. That's simply it. Now, if your application like changing its styles or content like once, twice per month or per year, why not? It's also an option. Don't think it's some insanity. It's actually viable options to do this kind of pre-rendering like manually by yourself in DevTools. Now, let's recap what we learned so far. First of all, don't block your user. Lie to the user. Be optimistic. Show some exponential excerpt and predict. By using all of those techniques, you can actually make your slow application look like really shiny and fast. And your users will be really happy. So, some words in conclusion. Now, despite all of those that I said and all the excitement about perceived performance, uh, it is very subjective metric. So I feel it's faster, I don't feel it's faster. Like it's really subjective, it's really hard to measure. But we actually can and should measure it like real performance. But to measure it, you need to gather some study group of 100 people, ask them a question to test a hypothesis, to check it, use some scientific methods. But anyway, how we get that amount of people? I'm just making small page for small website. How can I get those amount of people? You can actually use power of Yandex Toloka. This is actually not an advertisement. I really use this service a lot because, for example, you can do a side-by-side comparison for 100, 200 or 1,000 of people with really small budget. So you can help your perceived performance and check it, verify it, not to do it just like I like it. You can check it, verify, and be sure that it's going to help. A lot of actually large company use the service to do some user experience, some testing or user experiments. So don't be afraid to use it. It's really awesome and powerful tool. Now, after all I just said, like all the problems, caveats, etc., do we really need it? The code is more complex. There's much more work that we need to do. It's become really difficult to verify that your solutions is actually increasing perceived performance. Well, maybe we shouldn't try. Maybe we should leave as everything right now. Well, let me quote the greatest philosopher of our days, Shakira. Try everything. I mean it. Try everything. Try everything except drugs. Never do drugs. And that's all. Thank you for your attention. Um, Stepan, I think you offline. You mute microphone.
Yeah, thank you. So, one more time, thank you for presentation. That is really interesting topic, and yeah, it's always interesting to compare things and to know that sometimes these performance metrics and sometimes psychological things do matter more than actually some performance metrics for people. Okay, I'm waiting for the questions for performance. I'll take a chance and ask mine about pre-rendering. Have you looked at a project that is called Scully, Angular Scully, also for pre-rendering?
Yeah,
And
sure. I didn't include it here simply because Scully requires you to change your application code, and I was trying to show you that static pre-rendering is you can apply it in a way that wouldn't require you to rewrite your code at all. So there's a plugins that allow you to do static pre-rendering without any efforts of rewriting application. So if your use case of your application is really fits in the static pre-rendering, you should really use this Scully. It's really awesome, but you should remember that it requires some work to do on your side to make it work with your application.
yeah, that's true. Okay, thank you. I see we have questions coming. So the question is, how difficult to use skeleton comparing to spinners?
Well, it's actually not hard at all. But one thing that you should need to remember is that skeleton should not look exactly as your content. It should be like some rough sketch. So one thing you can do is to show your user interface to like to your friend, to your family, and ask them to draw it with the pen. Just draw how they remember it looking with the rough shape, with circle, rectangles, etc. And you can use it as a sketch to your skeleton, like the simplest example I have so far. So you don't need to look at exactly the same, but it should have like same margins, same spaces, same colors. They should use some colors. So it will require a little bit more work to do. Of course, that's true. I would not deny that, but it's not harder to implement because the skeleton itself is static. So you don't need to do dynamic skeleton. It's overkill. It doesn't require it. It would not help. So it's really simple. It's a job that you will do once. So it's harder that spinner, but it's not that hard. You need to do it once, and you will reuse it after that.
Okay, good. Next one is very much related. Also, taking account existing project and skeleton, the complexity.
Well, in existing project, once again, it's not that harder. The hardest part is just to tune it to your application style. So you need to spend some time like setting the right width heights for those circles, to lay out the elements, set margins, paddings to make them look like your actual UI. So that will require some time and tinkering, but as I said, it's one-time job. And once again, do not try to like replicate your UI one to one, like spend a lot of time to that. The point of skeleton is to like trick your brain is that when the content appear, that it's not appeared, it's actually was on the page. So don't try to like make it perfect. The user will understand that it's not the content. It would not help.
Okay, good. Thank you. Next one about feature links. So, does it work well with multiple objects which are placed one near another?
Yeah, it's the future link works really good actually, because this deceleration pattern and the speed of deceleration, like if you have the basics, like the raw basics on the any like game engine, physics engine, like you understand that it's all predictable. It's not like some weird voodoo magic. It's like it's science. Anyway, despite that, there's sometimes it happen like um, it can happen that the click was not intended actually and user clicks something else. So you have to have this idea of rollback or way to cancel. Thanks to observable, it's really easy to cancel like http request and other stuff. But for example, if you probably should not use future link for delete your account button, so this may end up ugly. So
Yeah, sure. Okay, good. Next one about have you ever used prediction library on real project?
I used not prediction. I used like the simplest stuff on when you predict the click, the tap. For example, I had the case where I developed application for iPad 2, like old version of iPod, and the application was really slow. And one of the optimization, there was actually a library fastlink. Maybe people heard of it, that allow you actually register click faster. So previously, old browsers, old iPads have like this delay, like 300, 400 millisecond before register click because of different touch event. So you register on touch, you check that user doesn't move your mouse, and you okay, this is probably a click. So I already use that technique, and it's helped to increase performance on old, really slow engine and JavaScript engine, and make it look and perceive as native application. Like people will really like enjoy by using this interface, simply because we was using this technique, and this technique is well known, so it's not a problem. The biggest problem is that you really have to think when to use it and what the rollback should be. As I said, with any optimistic updates or any predictions, you have to have like this rollback prepared. So you need to know how you can roll back in case of an error. So error may happen, and you need to design this rollback case. So that's one annoying thing that you have to think really hard when you're doing for production.
Okay, good. And one more question regarding the extra traffic usage and preloading resources. What do you think? For some, I don't know, situation when you have limited internet or don't have unlimited internet, and that's extra traffic for you.
Well, that's really simple. You should have at least mental image of your users, or you should at least know your user base. So you can open Google Analytics or Yandex Analytics, even better, and you can analyze what your user base, from what countries they are, what internet connection they use, what internet speed or they have. And also, thanks to the modern API, we have like information about the internet connection, so we can know if user on Wi-Fi or on 3G. And overall, if you use guest.js, it's actually really helping a lot, like really a lot. So it's the case when 90% of the times it will be correct. So the overall amount, yeah, there may be a user who would not be lucky, but if you split your code on small chunks, the penalty wouldn't be so big. It's like 10K, but this penalty will be for one of 10, and not for everyone. If you bundle everything together, like, and everyone is going to suffer. So this is like the case you that you need to consider. uh, I wouldn't say this is a problem. I never saw like the prediction libraries prefetching like a huge problem. It's gonna be a problem if you try to prefetch and preload everything. Yeah, that's true. For example, if you on one page and you preload every possible page everywhere, then yeah, it's going to be the problem, and user will complain, of course.
Yeah, and probably if you want to be creative in this optimization thing, as you said, you can check user agents, connection, and based on these parameters, just
Make a
do
decision.
not
Or
refresh.
if you really care about user opinion on that matter, you can give them an option, like user setting, like I want like fastest experience, or I want the most traffic safe. You can provide them an option, and they will be really pleased, especially if the traffic is critical for them. So here you better to know your user base.
Yeah, true. Okay, next one about payment request and whether that's good idea to do this optimistic thing.
Yeah, like I optimistically think that everyone want to send me money. Yeah, that's really optimistic. Well, anyway, um, as I said, when you do it for production, you always have to think about rollback. This is like the biggest concern that you have. So, for example, one case that is legitimate for this optimization is a login. So what you can do is, for example, if you have username, password, and the login button. So what you can do is you can, when the user filled all of those two fields and trying to hover the login button, you can already send request to login. So when user click on the login button, you already know if authorization successful or unsuccessful. So it doesn't change anything, and it would not breach your security because you just send in this request ahead of time. What you One thing that you need to do if you it is you need to increment this like your amounts of retry by one, because user may this prediction may be accidental. So you need to increment it by one. But other than that, it wouldn't compromise anything. It wouldn't change anything. So you really need to look on the case. So in case of the send money to someone, yeah, you should not do prediction. But for example, if user entering that he wants to send someone money, it's really wise idea to load all possible bundles to the next windows, for example, the check window, to load all of the assets from that. So you can avoid predicting business logic, but you can predict in user experience UI logic.
Okay, good, thank you. And next one about when it's better to focus on improving backend performance instead of front end, I guess.
Yeah, really nice question. And I can generalize it by saying, like, when it's better to improve real performance, like front end, back end, no matter what. And there's actually a good study about that. Like the study says that if you cannot increase your performance like by 10 or 20%, you probably should not bother about it. So, for example, if you increase your real performance on the backend on 1%, the amount of effort may not be worth it. So, by using just optimistic update, for example, like Twitter, like they spend 2 seconds to send like on the backend. It's huge amount, but it's totally fine. We don't have problem with that. So you really need to like measure how much of the effect of the performance you can get by spending this amount of time. It's an example of the airport that I told you earlier. Just by using other techniques, psychological techniques, they get much better user feedback. They don't spend this amount of money. They just can't deliver the package as usual, but get this benefit of happy customers. So here, once again, it really depends on the case. But overall, there's overall rule that you may also know that the difference in 100 milliseconds is almost invisible to the user. Like if something happens faster than 100 milliseconds, you may not notice it. So if you pile those performance optimization, like you improve here, 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 and overall you get a lot of performance improvements, yeah, you should. But if you work like a lot, like rewrite your application and get like 5% improvement, it may not be worth it. So you should really consider how much you can do.
Okay, so I think a good advice. Next one, also from Aleksey. Is there a situation when it's better to change Angular to something else with better performance?
Well, I would say that I'm as an Angular developer expert, I would not advise to use anything else. But to say seriously, I don't think that modern frameworks are the problem, really. Like Angular, Vue, React, they all have almost all basic state manager libraries. They have like Redux, all of them have their own implementation. All of them have alternative with local stores like Angular, Vue, React, etc. So really, I don't think modern frameworks is the problem at all. Just talk with your colleagues. If they all have experience in Angular, use Angular. If they all have experience in React, use React. But try Angular. Well, anyway, so it's really the matter of taste. But I would say that the framework here is not a problem. I showed examples using Angular, but all of those examples can be applied in React, Vue.js, or vanilla JavaScript.
Okay, good. Thank you. I think that was all questions. Now you need to pick one that you like the most.
I think I like the most about backend performance. It's really good question.